today is the big picture. That's the name of our message, the big picture, okay? And Jim, this ain't gonna be short, so. Jim don't like for me to pray because I pray too long. So,
Keep him awake.
yeah, just kick him every once in a while. This is the story of Joseph. I think most of us knows the story of Joseph, but I'm going to go over some of it just in case somebody doesn't, because, you know, everybody hadn't read everything in the Bible. So, and even if you have read it, sometimes it's been so long since you read it, you forgot what it said. So, that's what the lesson is over, the story of Joseph. And I'm going to read a lot of this, so bear with me. So many times in life we find ourselves in the middle of a situation that we're so absorbed in or overwhelmed by that we can't see anything else. And we just get so tore up over whatever that thing is. And, you know, sometimes it can be something simple like you're sitting in traffic and you need to be somewhere and you can't, the longer you sit there, the more upset you get. And you can't think about something else. That's just, you just get so tore up about it, and by the time that you get where you are, you're just all flustered because you've let that upset you so much. And then other times it can be really big things, like a financial problem or a health problem, or you might have a loved one that's going through something and you just wish so bad that you could help them, but you're helpless to do anything. You pray for them and you try to support them, but you can't get it off of your mind. It doesn't matter what else is going on in your life. It seems like you're constantly just focused on that challenge that has come into your life. And it seems like the more you think about it, sometimes the worse it gets, because you keep trying to fix it. You keep trying to fix it. And that's why we have our assistants here today. These are my attention getters. They're working this puzzle. And I think that this story of Joseph is a lot like life. You see the life of Joseph here. And I think that, to me, this just came to me several weeks ago, and I was talking to a friend, and I was talking about some things that had happened in my life, and I said, and all of a sudden, sometimes it's just like everything falls into place, and it's like all of a sudden, a puzzle, when it's a mess, you're lucky if you can even figure out what the picture's supposed to look like. If you got the box, you can, but if you didn't have the box, you wouldn't even know what you're putting together. That's how our lives are. But then, when you focus on that one piece and you just keep trying to make that one piece fit all the time. So we're going to talk about this in this story of Joseph and see how they did this and how God worked all these things together for good. In Genesis chapter 37 is where it starts, and I'm going to read it to y'all. I have to hold this up so I can see it. And it's a big Bible, so. Okay, first of all, I'm going to give you a little backstory so you'll know, in case you don't. Right, in a couple of chapters before that, you know, God gives Jacob the new name of Israel, and that's where the name Israel is born out of. And then out of that family comes the 7 tribes of Israel after Joseph dies. So Jacob's married to 4 women. He's got 4 wives. Rachel is the woman that he loves. She has 2 children. One is Joseph, and the other one's Benjamin. But she dies giving birth to Benjamin. And so, and it doesn't say this, but I'm saying, I think that Jacob really developed an attachment to Joseph because he was Rachel's son. He was his firstborn. And Rachel, he had other wives, and he had 12 sons, but he loved Rachel. And so that's why I think that he was so attached to Joseph. Okay, so now I'm going to read this. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan, and these are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was pastor in the flock with his brothers, while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel, okay, so God has given Jacob the new name. He was Jacob, but now his name is Israel, okay? Y'all got that? So when I say Israel or Jacob, those two names are interchangeable. Israel loved Joseph more than all of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, so they hated him, and they could not speak to him on any friendly terms. So now we're going to pull over and park there for a minute, and we're going to analyze this. It starts out where Joseph is 17 years of age. That's where we come to know Joseph. He's 17 years old. And the first thing that we read is he's a tattletale. He's telling on his brothers. He's gone to his father Jacob, and his brothers are out in the field. It's hot, and they're sweating and slaving, and what's he done? He's run in and told his daddy, oh, you're not going to believe what these guys are doing. And he's his daddy's favorite. Now, you know, we sat around this table the other night talking about when we were growing up and the dynamics of our families. And I already knew I was going to do this because I had been working on it. And I thought how unique it was sitting there listening to everybody talk about growing up and their families and their brothers and their sisters and how many kids there was, and was I the oldest or was I the youngest. And I thought it was so funny that I was reading this and studying on this right then, because it so pertains to their relationship. His brothers hated him. He was his daddy's favorite child, and all his brothers hated him so much because of it. And it seemed like every single thing he did just made them hate him more. But then you look at Jacob. Jacob had 4 wives, and he had 12 sons, but all he could see was Joseph. You think about that. Think about how that affected his children, how they felt like no matter what they did in this world, they were never going to win their daddy's approval. He couldn't even see them. All he could think about was Joseph. He was so zoomed in and focused on that one thing, he couldn't see how he was hurting his other children. He could only see that Joseph was his son. That's all he could see. All his brothers could see was their hate. They couldn't think about nothing else day and night. Every time they saw him or heard his voice, all they could see was how much they hated him. And what about Joseph? Well, Joseph thought he was special. He was so proud of himself. He couldn't do nothing wrong. And you couldn't blame him for thinking that. Why? It's what he'd been taught all his life, wasn't it? It didn't matter what he did. And I think we do that today. I think that a lot of times we don't realize when we're saying or doing something how it is affecting the people around us. If it's your children or your spouse. You know, I hear women talk about their husbands so bad sometimes. And I think I would never, even if and we do joke around, that's a true statement. But even if I had a problem with Tommy, I would talk to Tommy about it. I would never tear my husband down to other people. People don't think about if they're dealing with their children or their family or their friends. They don't focus about how to try to make it better a lot of times. They just zoom in on that one thing they don't like about somebody. Or they get so obsessed with their new car or their ball team, and it's all they can see, and they can't think about anything else. And they don't realize how it makes the other people around them feel. So a lot of times we don't realize that we're missing so much of life because we can't get our focus off of one thing. And that's what you see in these 3 situations with Joseph. The brothers, the father, and the son. They're all in their own little world. You've got a house full of people right here, and every one of these people are zoomed in on their own one little thing. So it happens, Joseph goes on, and he is having this dream. And then he has another dream. And in his mind, he's thinking, well, I'm going to tell my brothers about these dreams because that's what you would do. You go tell somebody, oh, you won't believe the dream I had last night. And you're not trying to be showing off or something. You're just sharing with them. In his mind, he's thinking, I'm going to tell him about this. They're going to be excited. But they're not excited. They're insulted. They're mad. He's dreaming about them bowing down, and it just burns them from the inside out. And even Jacob says to him, and I'm not reading all of this out of the Bible because it's a lot of scripture. It's chapters and chapters. So I'm paraphrasing. And y'all can go back and read it this afternoon after you eat dinner and take a nap. But, I mean, it's a good story. But he is just so excited about his dream because he's wondering what it means. But his brothers are furious, and even Jacob says to him, you're trying to tell me that me and your mother's going to come and bow down in front of you? You ought to be ashamed of yourself to say something so disrespectful to us. Well, Joseph don't think it's disrespectful because he's just telling them about his dream. And he believes that he is so special because that's just what they've told him all his life. So he doesn't see the harm in what he's doing. So, push comes to shove, and his brothers get so mad. One day, they decide they aren't putting up with it anymore. And his daddy sends him out to the field to bring them some water and some food. See, because Joseph didn't have to go out to the field if he didn't feel like it. So that day, he didn't go. He was just hanging out at home, goofing off in his pretty jacket. And he sends him out to the field and he says, go take your brother some water. So he goes out to the field to see him, and he can't find him, and somebody tells him where he's gone to. And they see him coming, and they say, look, here comes that dreamer. He thinks he's dreaming. He thinks he's so much better than us. We ought to just kill him. Now you think about that for a minute. It sounds pretty extreme when you say it, but do you know how many people are getting killed today on the road in road rage? How many people are running people off of the road just out of something that minuscule in their life, in a matter of moments? People get so mad that they're willing to take another person's life, even somebody they've never met and don't know anything about. Well, his brothers have put up with this nonsense all their lives, and they've worked hard to win the approval of their father, and still he has no love and care for them at all. So they plot to kill him. But then Reuben's another one of the brothers. He says, well, let's don't kill him. Let's just throw him in the pit and tell our father that we killed him, or tell him that he got lost or something, but let's don't kill him. Let's just put him in the pit. That'll show him. And he's worried. Now this is the thing with Reuben. Reuben is just a little bit able to see farther than the other brothers, because he's thinking about how it's going to devastate his father if they kill Joseph. He's knowing that that's going to break his father's heart. So that's what his plan is. But what ends up happening is they put him in the pit, and then Reuben, when he's gone, this band of people comes along, and his brothers gets him out of the pit and sell him. And they sell him into slavery. Now, think about this. You're Joseph. In your mind, life is just a bowl of cherries. You couldn't have no better life at all. And you walk out to take your brother some water one day, and they end up selling you into slavery. He hadn't even had to go to work every day if he didn't want to. Imagine, now he's away from his father and his brothers, and he's a slave. Can you imagine how hurtful that must have been for him? But Joseph doesn't lose his faith. And I think in that part, in this story, through this whole story, at every single place, I underlined how many times Joseph said that he still had his faith. How many times the scripture said, but the Lord was with Joseph. So many times in this scripture, in this story, it says, but the Lord was with Joseph. And I just think about that so much for my own self. And I'm sure y'all have been through stuff too. In the last 10 years, how hard our life has been in so many places, so many times, with me going blind and having to have all those surgeries, and with David and Sharon and little Mason, and always been through with that, and then finding out that I had cancer, and my sister's having cancer, and losing Aunt Nellie, and going through all of the challenge that we went through with that. The last 10 years has been so hard for me. And I had never been sold into slavery, but I can imagine that Joseph must have been now in a strange land by himself, broken-hearted and scared for not knowing what was going to happen next or why it was happening. For going from somebody that his life was so good to just about as bad as it could have got. And he didn't lose his faith. And I think that so many I haven't lost my faith. I've had some hard days and nights. I've had times when all I could do was pray that God would help me and be with me, because I couldn't come up with something better to say. There have just been days in my life in the last few years that's where I was, but I've always known that the Lord was with me. The comfort of knowing that God is with you. I don't know how people get through the hard places, because y'all, we're all coming to them, or we've been through them, and we're going to come to them again. I don't know how people get through the hard places without the love of the Lord, without knowing that Jesus is right there with them. And that's what the scripture said, that he will never leave us or forsake us. And that's what Joseph knew. So he was sold to the Pharaoh's right-hand man, and the scripture says God was with Joseph right here. God was with Joseph, and he blessed him. And he was an honest man. He did a good job. He got elevated to the highest position he could have as that guy's servant. I can't remember what his name was. Potiphar, I think. But then his wife decided that she wanted to be with him, and she kept trying to get him to sneak off with her, and he wouldn't do it, because he said, I would never sin against God and do something so evil. Now, he's been through all this, and he still doesn't ever want to do something to sin against God. See, Joseph's starting to see the big picture. He's starting to map up his life for himself, and he is making his own personal choices. And she finally gets mad one day. She grabs him and tries to get him to go in with her, and he won't go, and he pulls away from her, and when he does, she pulls his jacket off, and she holds on to it, and he runs out, and there's nobody else in the house, so there's no witnesses, and nobody sees what happens, and she starts screaming and telling the guards to come in there, and they do, and she tells them, and then later she tells her husband that he tried to attack her, and so now he throws him in jail. Now Joseph's in prison. There goes that. So you're thinking in your mind, well, that's not very good, but you know, Joseph still says, God was with me. And the scripture says, right here in verse 23 of chapter 39, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Now think about that. Do you think that if you'd have been sitting in that prison and been through everything Joseph went through, you'd be sitting there saying, God's making everything I do prosper? No, you wouldn't. And that's how come, I think, when I'm going to keep going back to this, because this is my point of this whole story, is when you zoom in on the one thing that's happening to you right now, like you're sitting there in prison, you can't see that God's right up there fighting your battles for you. That He's going to deliver you through whatever you're going through, and it's going to work out to His glory, and He's going to lift you up and carry you through your hard places. It might not be no fun, but you've got to keep your mind on the fact that God's going to be with you. And that's the thing that Joseph does. So, some other guys are in the jail, and they start to have these dreams. And they come to Joseph and ask him about them, and he interprets the dreams. But when he does it, he tells them plainly, it's not me, it's God. Don't be giving me glory for something I'm not doing. He's not going to let them think that he knows something that he doesn't. He's given God the glory for giving him the word of knowledge that he has. And he tells them both about their dreams. And one of them ends up getting hanged like he said he would, but the other one ends up getting pardoned, and he gets to go back to the palace. And while he's there, the years pass, and the Pharaoh has a dream. And he calls all the people to come and see him and tell him all of his guys that he's got on his staff that know stuff, and none of them can explain his dream. And then that guy remembers when he was in prison and Joseph interpreted his dream. And he says, I know a guy, but he's in prison, but he is good at interpreting dreams because he did when I was there and he was right. So he said, well, go get him. So they went and got him, and he come up and he told the Pharaoh again, it's not me that's going to interpret your dream, it'll be God. So tell me what your dream was, and the Lord will tell me what to say. And he told him, and he was right. So he interprets the Pharaoh's dream, and the Pharaoh says, okay, I'm going to make you head over everything in Egypt. The only difference between me and you will be that I'm the Pharaoh, but you're going to be the ruler. And he turns all of Egypt over to Joseph, and he prepares for the famine that the Pharaoh dreamed about. And he is able to store up all this food for 7 years. Now, I want you to try to wrap your mind around the fact that you're reading this story in a matter of minutes. I'm sitting here telling you this, and not short enough minutes for Jim, but I'm sitting here telling you this story in a matter of minutes. This was years of Joseph's life. If you can just try to wrap your mind around for a minute that he had gone through, his life has just been one challenge after another. And now here he is, lifted up to the highest position in Egypt, except for being Pharaoh. And he has followed God's direction all along the way. He's honored his commandments. He's not done something that wasn't right. He's given God glory for everything, even when he was in prison. And now he's over all of Egypt, and they've stored up for 7 years all this grain, and now the famines come. And all of Egypt has food, but nobody else does. And what happens? Everybody in the land starts to starve to death. All the outlying lands. Just imagine if Gallatin was the only place that had food and all the rest of Tennessee was starving. Can you imagine? You talk about some traffic jams. Can you imagine how everybody would be coming trying to find a way to get some food so they wouldn't die? Well, guess who needs something to eat? Joseph's brothers. So Jacob says to them, go to Egypt and get some food now. All these years have gone by. Joseph's 30 years old now. He's married. He's got 2 sons. And even in the scripture, it says that when he had his sons, that it helped to heal some of the pain that he felt from leaving his family and not ever knowing what happened to him. And all through the time that you're reading all of this, you know what's not there? Joseph being mad. What's not there is Joseph wanting to get even with his brothers. What's not there is Joseph blaming somebody for the situation he's in. Now, he would have been completely justified to do any of those things, but he didn't. He didn't do it. He only was seeking the face of God, but he was heartbroken all along. He's 30 years old now. He was 17 when this happened. 30 years old now. And still, it says when he had his children that it helped to heal some of the hurt from what happened in his childhood. So we carry that pain with us, don't we? Whatever it is that we have, different things that happen along in our life, we carry that pain with us. But we don't have to let it consume us. And I feel like that's this message right here, is we don't have to let the hard things in our life consume us. We don't have to zoom in on that one thing. We can back up and look at it and see that God's going to bless us and we're going to have better days. And that's what he did. So, Jacob sends the brothers to Egypt. And they don't even recognize Joseph. They go right before him to ask him for food. They take money, and they're willing to pay for what he can give them. But he knows who they are as soon as they walk up. And he starts to play this little game with them to try to find out, without telling them who he is, one, if his father's still alive. He wants to know, is my daddy even still living? And two, he wants to see his little brother, Benjamin. That's his two loves in his life. His little brother, Benjamin, and his daddy. And he wants to see them. So he devises a way to talk them into, they go back and forth through a series of different things, and eventually he gets all them to come, and he gets Benjamin there, and they are clueless the whole time that this is Joseph. They're just trying to find a way to get some food. That's all they're interested in. Let me find my page. This is so good.
Amen.
It's a good story, it really is. But it's long. So they all come down there, and it says that when they all finally got there and Joseph saw Benjamin, that he held him and cried. And when he finally tells all his brothers who he is, he cries so loud, it says, that the guards outside of the palace could hear him crying. And that they told the other people that what they heard, and that all of Egypt knew that he was crying. But he was crying because he was so happy to have his family back. And all the while, they started thinking, oh, what's going to happen to us now? Look what we've done. We did this terrible thing, and now he's going to be mad, and he can do anything he wants to with us. And I'm going to read you what this says. Where's my glasses? This is so good. I love this so much. This says, do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant, in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all the household, and ruler over the land of Egypt. This scripture right here, I love this scripture. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So all the while that they're all so worried about Joseph wanting to get even with them, he's looking at this so differently. He's thinking to himself, God sent me here so I could save you, so that you wouldn't starve to death when this time came. God knew all this was going to happen. And because of him, you sold me into slavery, and I was able to come here and put up all of this grain so that when you came, there would be food. He's not one single bit thinking about how mad he is at his brothers, and they're terrified. They're thinking he's going to have them drawn and quartered. But it's not the way it was. And then he says, now you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you've seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here. And then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all his brothers, and he wept on them. And afterwards he talked with his brothers. So they went and they got Jacob, and they brought him back to the land, and they all lived together, and they were happy, and they were able to reunite their family, and they had food to eat, and everything went well. But his brothers were still focused in on one thing, and it was their guilt. They were still, after all the years that they were in Egypt and in the palace and with Joseph and Jacob, and everything was good, and people were married and had their children, and they were living all these years together happily, but his brothers were still afraid. They still believed that Joseph wanted to get even with them. They couldn't imagine that somebody was not going to want to get even with them, because they knew what they did was wrong, and they were guilty for it. And after Jacob dies and he's passed, then they start to talk together, and they say, maybe the only reason why he didn't do something to us was because of our father, and he didn't want to upset him. But he's passed now. What will become of us? What's he going to do? Is he going to lash out after us now? All the way down to the very end, almost, of Joseph's life, they are afraid of his anger. Because of what? They're focused in on just that one thing. They can't let it go. Joseph's forgiven them. He's not mad at them, but they cannot put that down. And here's what the scripture says about it. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph bears a grudge against us, and he pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him? So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, your father charged us before he died, saying, you shall say to Joseph, please forgive, I beg you, the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And then his brothers also came, and they fell down before him, and they said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring us about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So that's pretty much the end of the story. Then it's not long after that that Joseph dies. What does he say? Boy, we all need to remember this little sentence right here. Am I in God's place? That's what he says to them. And you know as well as you're sitting here, you would think you had every right in the world to seek revenge or get even with them. You would feel completely justified. But Joseph doesn't even consider it. It's not even a consideration. He says, am I in God's place? No, none of us are. Because sometimes bad things happen to us, but it can still be part of God's plan. And he's got a way that he's going to make clear. And when you come down to the end of it, what does Joseph see? The big picture. He sees the big picture. Boy, and it's big, isn't it? Because he was there, how many thousands of people didn't starve to death? It wasn't even about Joseph and his brothers. This whole story about Joseph and his brothers, what's the big picture? The big picture is that God provided a way to save all the people in that land. As far out as you could see, people came from miles away to get food. They traded their cattle and their goats and their chickens. They bought money, anything they had so that they could get food. And because Joseph looked to God, he was able to provide them with sustenance to save them from starving to death. So Joseph sees the big picture, and that's what I'm telling y'all. Now we've got Amber and Caitlin over here, and they started out with a big mess, but we can't hold it up because you can't see it. But you can come over here and look at this beautiful picture they've put together. And I'm going to tell you something. I worked this puzzle with my mama a few days ago when she came down to my house. I'm taking this piece out right here. I don't know how many times I picked this piece of puzzle up. I knew it had to go over here. Now there's several places. There's a little spot down here it could have gone, or it could have gone up here, but it wouldn't fit there. And all along while I was working this puzzle, when I'd get another section of it together, lo and behold, I'd pick this piece up again. And I kept trying for the goodness of me. It was a line piece. That's what I call these edges. I call them line pieces. It was a line piece, and I kept thinking, why can't I make this go somewhere? And I kept trying to put it over here and put it over here. You know, this was just about the second to the last piece that I finally figured out where it went. And that's just how we do in life. You just got one little piece right here of the puzzle. Whatever you're dealing with today, whatever's going on in your mind that you're focused on, it's just like this one little piece of the puzzle. It's not the big picture. It's just this one little piece. Jacob and Joseph and his brothers, they were just looking at one little piece of a puzzle. Never, all those years way back there when Joseph was 17, never could they have imagined that all the things they were thinking about didn't have nothing to do with the big picture. This piece didn't go anywhere. But then when I got the whole thing put together, let me tell you something. You can get excited about putting a puzzle piece in the right. I'm telling you, when you put it in the right spot, you're just like, woohoo, I got it.
Well, we know.
And that is my message for y'all today, is to focus on the big picture. Let God be in control of your life where it is. You're going to have some hard days. You're going to be in the pit. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be heartbroken. You're going to get blamed for something you didn't do. All those days are going to be there. You're going to lose people that you love. Stuff's going to get hard sometimes, but focus on the Lord and realize that He's got a bigger plan than any of us could ever even dream of. and give him glory for what's right in your life, and you'll be a lot happier person.
Amen.
That's all I got, y'all.
We want more, that was great.
Thank you, Denise, that was neat.
Oh, okay.